Good afternoon. Tuesday, September the 23rd. This is the work session for the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, and want to welcome everybody. The next item on the agenda is our citizen comments. I have no speaker cards, so we'll move on to item one.
We do roll call first.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, let's call the roll. That's a great idea. I was trying to get the meeting done early.
Sorry.
Alderman Barnhill, Alderman Blanton, Alderman Caesar, Alderman Peterson, Alderman Berger, Alderman Brown, Vice Mayor Potts, Alderman Baggett, and the mayor's here. Now we'll keep on. I have no speaker cards for citizen comments, so we'll go to the work session. Discussion items. Number one is compliance to sell wine in a retail store for Gray's in Franklin. Any questions or comments? Item two is certificate of compliance for liquor license for Smoky Barrel. No questions. Item three is ordinance 2025-43 to amend Title V, Chapter 7, Section 705 of the Franklin Municipal Code related to hotel motel occupancy, tax collection, and refund. Jessica, tell us about that.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. So this ordinance deals with a recent change in state law about how hotel motel occupancy taxes are collected and refunded. So previously under state law, if someone stayed for 30 consecutive days, they would get a refund of the occupancy tax previously paid. And then the hotel operators would be entitled to a credit or a refund from the city. But now under the amended state law, operators must remit the tax to the city for the first 30 days, and then they stop collecting the tax from the guests for the rest of their stay. So before, the city was not collecting any tax on long-term stays, and now we will collect for the first 30 days. Therefore, staff is recommending that our municipal code be updated to align with this new state law, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Seeing none, we'll go to item four, which ordinance 2025-46 to amend Title 7, Chapter 5 Franklin Municipal Code to adopt the NFPA 101 Life Safety Code, and we'll go to the next one, which is also the International Fire Code 2024 edition. Any questions about those? We saw a lot of those in the last session, so next is.
But Andy looks really good. Let's not miss an opportunity.
Thank you. And it is Fire Prevention Proclamation as well at 7 o'clock, so everybody can stick
There's a
around.
lot going on. That's great.
Okay, Amendment 8 to City of Franklin Contract 2020-0041 with OHM Studio 8 Design for additional services related to design, development, construction drawings in the amount of $32,580 and design contingency the amount of $67,420 for a total amount not to exceed $100,000.
Good evening. When we were reviewing construction drawings, staff identified a couple of areas specifically related to utility coordination and stormwater systems that we felt we could possibly save some money. We evaluated it in terms of costs, identified construction cost savings of approximately $200,000, had the design engineer redo that work, and that was the cost of $32,580. Again, we do believe this is going to result in a construction cost savings of about $200,000. One of the things that we're asking for here is an additional $67,420 should staff run into another situation where we want to look at potentially doing some additional design work to drive costs down. This is all part of the VE work that we continue to do through the project. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
So I look at it as an additional allowance that helps us bring some design help on board that could help us save additional dollars. The first third is already allocated and is going to save us about $200,000. So we would hope to do something similar. Don't know exactly what that might look like, but it came in very handy to do that here, and having that capacity available might help us act a little quicker if there are other opportunities.
Right.
Mayor,
Mr. Barnhill, Alderman Barnhill.
to date, do you know what we've paid Studio 8?
I do not have that number off the top of my head. My apologies.
If we ask for it, you could get it.
I'll be
We
happy
can
to
get
get
you
it for
that.
you.
Yes.
Alderman Caesar.
Thank you. Just so I'm tracking, we're investing another 100,000 to potentially save 200, or is there more savings beyond the 200?
You're investing 30,000 to save 200,000, and then providing an additional allowance of around 67,000 for other opportunities that may come our way.
Like this.
We may not use it, yeah, like this.
Yep.
So your first initial, your known, is the 32,000 is going to generate about 200,000 in savings, and this is just an allowance that we would use, judiciously if there's other opportunities come our way.
Should a potential opportunity come up, we're going to have it vetted through our owner's rep. The staff kind of core team is going to evaluate it, run it through city administrator, and make a determination at that point. But I mean, it's again, we're trying to drive costs down. If we could do some redesign to assist with that, we'd like to explore that. So that's it.
Good use of funds. Thank you.
Alderman Barnhill.
Well, my only other comment to you is, there may not be anybody else interested. I would like to see and know what we've paid Studio 8 so far.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we can get you that number, no problem.
Okay, we'll go to item 7, which is City of Franklin Contract 2025-0316 with Williamson County Schools and a local agreement for use of parks for theatrical performances.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening. We're excited to kind of bring this before you tonight as we build Bicentennial and the stage that adjoins, along with other parks that we have. But we see that this is an opportunity with our team is to expand our programming, there's over 1,000 students in the Williamson County theatrical arts from elementary, middle, high schools. And as we want to expand programming, why not tap into that? And so allow for the general public to see free performances. They've done musicals, they do theater, they do plays, maybe Shakespeare in the Park is what we've talked about with some of the directors. So we're excited to be able to that's just another piece of the puzzle as we talk about the arts in our community, to expand it and allow for those in our community to see theatrical performances for free. We do have it in the interlocal agreement that schools, they do fundraise, they do trips, and they costumes and all that. They could request for some donations, but we also could come in and do concessions as well. So I'm happy to.
But no charge for the public
But
to
no
attend
charge
any
to-
of the performances.
Absolutely. So a special thank you to Dr. Goldman, as well as the Williamson County School Board for considering this. But it's before you tonight first for your consideration. And thank you to Shauna and her team. We've got a little bit of background with some theater stuff, so we're excited to be able to expand this program. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
I would like to say, though, if it does pass, I think the first show will be at Harlansdale Barn, and it will be Centennial High School's performance of Sleepy Hollow.
So, yeah, it just really provides a great opportunity and to be able to share that. We have a lot of families who come out to our events and can't afford to go to the movies if you've got, 4 or 5 in your family. So some of you can, I'm just sharing. You understand. So
Next.
I'm not going to look at him when I'm talking about that. Any questions or? All right. Thank
Okay,
you all.
item 8 is City of Franklin Contract 2025-0208 with Bassberry and Sims PLC for an engagement letter for bond counsel.
As you know, we work with Bassberry as our bond counsel, generally Lillian. But there are some times when we have questions or issues that we need to work through with her that might not necessarily be covered by our bond issues. You might see some of that coming through tonight with our last discussion. So we need a way to be able to have a contract that can allow us to work with her outside of an actual bond issue, a GO bond issue.
No questions?
Similar to all the other engagement contracts that we've had in the past.
And Bassberry's been long-standing bond counsel, great support for us as we work through those topics and have great background in those areas too.
Okay, we'll go to item 9, which is draft resolution 2025-85, resolution approving modify the City of Franklin capital investment plan.
All right, so we're going to walk through the specific resolution. This is a follow-on to the presentation we went through last meeting and had a pretty good detailed discussion, but we're bringing it back with specific recommendations consistent with what we shared and were recommending last time. This would update your CIP, add some projects, would still allow for some unprogrammed capacity for us as well. There are a couple projects in here that will be refined further that may drive some costs down as well. So this would set the course going forward for these additional projects and updates where we are in terms of the overall CIP program. And Michael and Paul will take you through that.
In a moment. That's why it took so long. It was the big one from last time. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the board. My name is Michael Walters Young, your Chief Budget and Performance Officer. Paul Holzen, your City Engineer, is with me. We want to walk you through the draft resolution, or 2025-85. It is law approved. It still says draft because that's what it was when the agenda was published. But you do have a law approved version in your packets this evening. Very briefly, this is a 8-slide presentation, so it's much quicker than last time. Just a quick review of the available revenues, what you have committed in expenses to this point in time, that list of additional projects, and then a summary and next steps. So to review, we're looking at a projection of $460 million in the next 10 years. That's $139 million in debt, or roughly 30%, and $321 million in cash, or nearly 70%, balancing revenues between those two major sources. You have, to date, $364.5 million of committed projects. There are nearly $250 million of capital projects that are currently underway in the city of Franklin, Tennessee. There's another $63 million that is in the right-of-way and right-of-way acquisition and bidding phase, and then almost $53 million that is purely in the design phase, once again for that total of $364.5. Resolution 2025-85 lists these 7 additional projects as listed and presented last time for you, totaling $91.5 million. I won't read them all. We did review them last time. If you were to add them, this is how that list would look in summary. So the amount in design would go from where it was $53 million to $144 million, for a total of $456 million of committed projects against $460 million in proposed revenues. To summarize, there's roughly $95.6 million in non-committed revenue projected, and this resolution would propose adding $91.5 million to that list of approvals.
So there are 2 projects that we discussed last time. We put the full amount or the most expensive version of the Eddie Lane sidewalk project and the Boyd Mill Avenue improvements area, also sort of sidewalk and trail work. So there are other options that will be a little less costly that we will bring forward to you. But from a planning standpoint, we put the highest number in there. There are going to be some opportunities for you to bring those dollars down that would free up some additional unprogrammed capacity as well.
Questions? Alderman Baggett.
There was a comment last time about the Goose Creek bypass and Carruthers extension, or that there might be public-private partnership opportunities. Now, here's what I'm thinking: is we're, encumbering. Of course, that needs to happen. What I'm hearing, talking to residents, is that we've got some catching up to do, and I would agree in some areas, for sure. Mostly in and around our state roads, and so the $40 million being a pretty large chunk on top of the other $30, $40, $50 million in road work that we've got in that area as well that was proactive. Some of that Goose Creek, not Goose Creek, the bridge over the interstate, which
Long Lane
is
Overpass.
Long Lane Overpass, which we won't go back to, but I just wonder if there's just some more context there. This Goose Creek bypass, the Long Lane Overpass was going to have 6,000 trips in 10 years, something like that. And we've got, like I've said, and I'm glad to see Franklin Road on here. I'm glad to see this McHatcher and Hillsborough Road intersection on here. But we've got areas that have tens and plus thousands of people on it today. And there's and here we are committing to a $40 million road where, we want to get ahead down there, but that's just a big number to commit to when we've got, I think, a lot of other projects that we talked about during the property tax discussion, visiting some of those, possibly state partnerships that we would have to engage in. And so it just causes me to think about this $40 million a little bit more.
I think you bring up some good points. What I would say is it's a 10-year plan. I would put this farther back in the 10-year plan. With the number of projects that we have, we're not going to be able to focus on delivering all of them right off the bat. So we're going to have to work on prioritizing the most important projects to get them moving forward. And as we go through those years, as that public-private partnership is ready, the dollars would be there and available would be what I would say. And what I would envision is with our quarterly update that we're doing is to try to bring you back all those projects with schedules so that you could really see them to make sure that the projects we're really focusing on are truly your top priorities.
And we do want to work for aligning infrastructure with development. This would be driven by the timing of private development. This wouldn't be something we would do way in front of, but we would try to sync it up with as that development's more
Yes.
more likely to come online, that we would sync that up. So we're trying to pace that out, and Paul's exactly right. It's going to be on the very back half, most likely, of that 10-year planning window.
Unless in 6 months they come forward with a huge development and
Yeah.
we need to figure out how to move it forward.
Well, and I think that's the thing I'm trying to weigh here is what do we need? And I think there are a lot of projects. We talk about these micro projects that are on here now, right?
Yep.
And I appreciate that. I think there's even more. One thing I've been talking about, and I know others aldermen have heard me talk about this, and also have expressed this, is this idea of setting aside some funds for micro projects, like we see here, but also probably smaller than some of these, and how we can expedite those. So we're getting close to that 95 million, and that of all the projects on this, I think they're all needed. That's the only one that I think happens to be 4 times as big as the other largest of the others, is one that or roughly. I just want us to be thoughtful about that. Thoughtful about if there are other projects that might pop up in a shorter time frame that we might need, and how does that encumbering the $40 million now? I guess we would just address it in the future. Like, we would address it if a development did come through and could partner.
Yes. So if we reevaluate the CIP in a year, 2 years, and we haven't spent any money on that, I would assume, just like we did last time, that we haven't really fully committed to that. It could easily be looked at again, versus a project that we've spent a tremendous amount of money on, that we continue to finish what we've started.
Understood. And then finally, the home raising project that has $11 million in the CIP. When do we get to clear that out? I mean, when does those funds become available? If
Yeah.
What I'd
Not
love
used,
to do
yeah.
is to take the leftover funds of that and put it towards these micro projects and funding. Because here's what we got to do too. Some of those funds need to go towards staff time or outside time to make sure. I mean, you said it just now. We got to focus on the ones. You can't do all of them at once. But some of these micro projects, maybe we could take that $11 million or 10, whatever's left over of the home raising, and focus towards the micro projects.
So my understanding is that the Army Corps is trying to get a full commitment so that they can close this program out. There's about 4 properties remaining that they're trying to get the commitment finalized on. And so once that's done, hopefully by the end of the year, we have a clear time frame to finish that out. And some of it's in the resident's hand trying to secure a contractor to do it.
And that's hard.
But we should be able to finalize the cost and what our allocation is at that point.
But we will have defined it at that point. So we're carrying a
close.
most conservative number we can at this stage, so that would free up some dollars. You've got Boyd Mill and Eddie Lane that present some opportunities, and you've already got 4 million of unprogrammed dollars. So I think there is some flexibility built in here that helps us respond to opportunities. We've been able to find some capacity within operating budgets too to get some things jump started that have helped us with these types of
Agreed.
smaller impactful projects. So we're definitely ready to go to try to work for those opportunities and have some capacity both here, and I think there's some paths within the operating budget that can help us too. So we hear you on that, and we're ready to have some
And I
capability to do it.
just want to say, if a micro project comes up and it's going to make a big difference on transportation, we are absolutely going to bring that forward to you and figure out how we can make an impact.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Potts.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate what you're saying, Paul. It's always great. This was the Goose Creek Bypass and Carruthers Extension was a top-rated, ranked project previously, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. And so as we go into the funding for this project, and it will be potentially, as you said, at the end of that 10-year window, we'd be able to reevaluate, be able to look at public and private partnerships. The landscape may have changed. We may have been able to really maximize, tap into a lot of these micro projects. But I would just caution us as we look at any of these figures that we have here to start doing any cutting, any type of changes to any of these projects with where we are right now. But I do look forward to, as you just said, we're going to go through a CIP re-ranking here in about 1.5 to 2 years. So I think that's a great opportunity to see that, but then also to see how these projects are going to grow and to develop and meet the needs of our citizens.
Alderman Bland.
I just want to say, number one, I think the Goose Creek being on here does answer the continual question that we're not getting ahead of our infrastructure. But the elephant in the room is if this is going to fall down to 10 years from now, that price is not going to be what we're looking at. So, I mean, I love the idea that we're pinning this to the wall, that it's something we need to get done. But I think if I had a crystal ball, number one, that price is going to go up. Number two, there's going to be a lot of immediate things that probably pop up in front of it.
We do try to anticipate those costs, but it's something to
know.
look at. The timing's uncertain, so that will be a factor for sure.
10 years
Yeah.
is a long time
Yeah.
for a price to stay,
Yeah.
even with
So we did-
contingencies.
With the estimates, we do try to look at the horizon year that it might happen.
I'm not
and
I'm not
inflate it.
discrediting you.
Okay.
I'm just saying
You're
I've done
probably
this
correct.
a while.
You've done it a while. You're
And
right.
I've
It
seen how
happens.
prices change a little bit.
Yes.
It happens.
Especially in a decade.
Understood.
So,
No
just
question.
saying.
It happens.
Understood.
Alderman Peterson.
Whenever I tried to look to see where the Goose Creek bypass extension might be, I couldn't tell. I mean, no, we didn't have a map of the where we're planning to do that, but that looked like a whole bunch of different things that could be done with the Goose Creek bypass, and I just would like to know before we really get into all of this exactly what is being planned for that. And as I say, whenever I looked at it just on the map, I couldn't figure it out at all. And I do appreciate the other things being said too, and also the Boyd Mill, Avenue is kind of like the Eddie Lane in a way, in some respects. I assume that we're going to do the Fire Station 3 replacement.
Yes.
That would be
Yeah.
done, period. But the other parts, I just like to see what's being really, what the project would really be.
Yes, ma'am. So within all the scopes, when we start getting contracts for these projects, part of it will be looking at 2 to 3 different options and bringing that back to the board, taking that to the public to get their feedback, and then ultimately y'all making a decision on which option you want to move forward with, and then we would proceed with the design.
I've got Alderman Berger, then Alderman Silver.
'em. Paul, thank you, Mr. Mayor. When we start getting contracts for these projects, part of it will be looking at 2 to 3 different options and bringing that back to the board, and then ultimately y'all making a decision on which option you want to move forward with, and then we would proceed with the design. when you look at these projects, these road projects here, I'm wondering about the capacity of traffic. So the current capacity on these legs that we have here, and what's forecasted in the next 10 years, and what's in the pipeline now and forecasted possibly for development in those areas. And then we look at the feeder roads that these things feed into, feeder roads that feed into this. And then looking at what's most critical for moving traffic. That's how I want to make a decision on this stuff, on these items here. So when we take a look at that, can we prioritize that? Because our main goal is to move traffic, to prevent gridlock, pileups, stoppages, and I know a lot of roads go into the state routes. So how are we looking at that from that analysis?
So when we bring back, for the quarterly update, we can bring back all the schedules and show you which ones we're really focusing on. It's from a staff standpoint. And I can tell you projects like Franklin Road improvements and Mac Hatcher at Hillsborough Road will be two that we really, really push to prioritize because it's going to help alleviate significant congestion.
And the Hillsborough Road at Mac Hatcher, that's that intersection
Yes.
only
Yes.
that we were talking about. It says intersection.
We'll give you a chance to weigh in on that. to
What
make
did
sure
that
we're
all
aligned.
include on Eddie Lane?
Eddie Lane, well, there'll be a few different options that we have to look at.
Okay.
Is it just a sidewalk project
Okay,
or?
so you'll bring us options?
We'll bring you
for that?
options.
Okay. And then, I really think these fire stations are very critical to us. Our first responders need to be prioritized. And then I'd love to know the volumes too on some of these as well. And what those projections are, Brandon, Patrick spoke to the Goose Creek bypass, but I'd like to know what those projections are going to be there as well.
Okay, we can definitely do that when we
According
bring it
to
back.
taking a circle and just running it around that area to see what developments and what things are coming online. We have the new, what's the name of the assisted living, the facility down off of
Erickson.
Yeah, that's going. Of course, that shouldn't create a lot of traffic, but any developments in the area. So maybe you take a radius and you say how far out does this affect these areas. So I think we need that's critical information for me.
Okay.
Thanks.
Alderman Caesar.
Thanks, Mayor. I wasn't here for last week's discussion, but I've watched it, and what I'm hearing from the board tonight is not necessarily anyone that's against Goose Creek bypass. I think what they're against is a macro project that is limiting some micro projects. And as we think about budgeting, that's how I do it in my house. I say it's going to cost us this much to get new tires for the car, so we're probably not going to get those new shoes today because we've got the car in the future. I worry that the $40 million bucket is potentially going to keep us from looking at some of those smaller projects, but I'm confident after hearing the discussion tonight that we won't turn away some of the smaller projects and that there are some easier, smaller wins. My biggest concern is with allocation of staff time. If staff is thinking we're going to be working on this macro project, perhaps they don't have capacity to work on some of the smaller wins that are really going to change the lives of neighbors, whether it's a sidewalk or whether it's a small bike path or something along those lines. And I know this board has done a really good job historically. I didn't have Goose Creek bypass in my top 10, even though, as Alderman Potts pointed out, it was one of the top ones when we looked at the aggregate. And the reason I didn't have it as one of my top projects is I didn't want to park $40 million of resources in a macro project and limit our ability to attack some of these small wins. And so that's my perspective. I hope that staff, and I know that Eric, you're going to work hard to do this, we won't overlook some of those projects. I think Alderman Blanton's spot on. Like, we could probably buy it for $40 million today and sell it for $60 million 10 years in the future, because inflation is going to happen on those types of projects. And the other reason is I think there's a great opportunity in that area as that property and those properties develop to do some really innovative public-private partnerships to get some of the infrastructure in place. And at least discount some of the costs that we have here potentially, and I guess at the end of the day, I don't want to overlook small wins because we've got a big one that we think might happen in 10 years.
Agree 100%.
All right, everybody. All right, Alderman Barnhill.
How does this affect, we've got Ovation and Aroma tonight, and we know that that's gonna be a tremendous amount of traffic, and yet we're looking at this area right here. And when I see this, I see traffic from Moore's Lane all the way down to Goose Creek, whatever. And I've said this more times than not, that we need to make sure that we've got that corridor where we want it to be. And we've done some good work on Carruthers, especially Carruthers South. But I would be, I'm a little bit concerned that we're looking to snip away at 40 million when we've already said 40 million is not gonna build it when we get ready to build it. So if we,
No, I said that. They
Yeah.
said it would.
they said it would be,
Yes, sir.
We didn't say.
well,
They use their crystal ball. Mine's
okay, yeah. Well, I'm sitting by a crystal ball and I'll lean on it once in a while here. But I would be concerned about any reduction in this right here. We've got, you've got Boyd Mill in here, you've got Franklin Road, and you've got Eddie Lane. I think those are three smaller projects. And I said last time we was here that Franklin Road from McHatcher to Gateway needs to be done. That needs to be done. That's not here as far as the State Route 397 to Mallory Station. But, yeah, you know, there is a concern on my part that we try to pull a few out of here and a few out of here and put them on, I guess, a macro project or something other. We probably need, you know, I'll be honest with you, if we sit down and prioritize on this right here and put projects in line that we think we would get, we probably have funding to cover some of the macro projects that Alderman Baggett is discussing without affecting I think Goose Creek Bypass was probably number one.
It
Was the number one project. So we're gonna go back and look and take parts of number one away so that we can do something that is not number one on the list. And I think that project has been probably number one on just about every list that for the last quite some time now. That's been the number one capital project that we had going for us then. And again, all of us receive the same emails, and they're interesting. They don't say a lot, but they are interesting in the fact that they are saying they want development to stop until infrastructure catches up. And I don't know, and I don't have any idea what that means. I mean, I understand that that's a big number, big nothing out here in space, because you can't do that. You just don't stop projects that are paying for the infrastructure that's coming over here. So, but I don't want to do too much to that $40 million. I think that is the number one project. And I think we've discussed it as such for quite some time now. I do think this, and I don't think anybody would argue, the growth for Franklin over the next several years is going south of I-65 along the Carruthers Parkway and along in this area right here. So we've got a real opportunity to maybe get slightly ahead on some road infrastructure.
Alderman Brown.
Just say real quick, to me, there's two components of these micro projects. One is a little less expenditure to make big impact, but it's also about moving quicker. Staff's made 3 commitments to us last few meetings. One is we're going to start seeing some quarterly updates. One, they're going to look at the CIP a little bit more frequently, and then Paul just said that if something comes up, we're going to know about it. All I would say is I just don't want us to get hung up too much in something that we can revisit here in a short amount of time, in a couple of years, and not immediately start getting on these projects. Because if we're delaying things like Franklin Road and the Hillsborough, McHatcher, we need to get them moving. So take them into a separate list if you want or whatever, but I would hate for us to sit here and keep debating or be concerned about one thing and not be getting going on the other things, is my concern.
Understood.
Alderman Baggett.
Let me clarify I brought the $40 million up on Goose Creek to have the conversation really that we just had, which is letting staff know that while we are concerned with the big picture, the big ticket items, macro items, that the micro is equally, if not, in my opinion, more important. And you've done that. Man, we've seen projects pop up here, and thank you. I think there's got to be, I've heard at my city or my campaign event things, people are bringing, I think there's public input for some of these micro projects too, where we hear about specific intersections that we can, again, staff time is important. This might have to be outsourced, but I want to make sure, I think what you're hearing is we don't want to encumber so much that we can't have that flexibility for whatever that looks like. You've told us we're not doing that, and I agree. I'm not going to make a motion to pull Goose Creek out because we do need to get it and get ahead. But I think very clearly we have to have a way to address the speed, and you hit it, the speed of these smaller projects. And whatever you need to do that, I think you're hearing a board that is saying you need more people. If you need another engineer, if you need an third party, whatever it takes to get these things moving, I think you've got a supportive board.
Thank you. One other thing I'd just like to add about the micro projects is a lot of that's going to come out of traffic impact studies. And a lot of times, due to our limited staff, we like to tie those to road impact fee offset agreements.
Sure.
And let them try to deliver it quicker and faster. Now, an example is the Hillsborough Road one. I actually think I can do that one faster than the developer. So if it gets put in this plan, we will move that forward really, really quick.
Great.
Well, I'd go back to Alderman Barnhill's comments and remembering whenever we were trying to make a decision on funding South Carruthers, and there was a lot of waffling around, and we couldn't make up our mind. And I do remember Alderman Barnhill pushing that pretty hard, and I can't imagine what that area would look like or be today, traffic-wise and accident-wise, if we had not made that choice. Maybe we should have made it 4 lanes. We did at least grade it to for 4 lanes in the future. The other thing is, here's your sound bite for the night, that we have nearly $500 million of projects committed in various phases. So that says a lot. So anyway, you ready to go on? How about item 10, presentation on financial aspects of infrastructure development districts?
I'll say a few things as we get started, and this has been an ongoing effort. We appreciate very much feedback we got when we reviewed some elements of a possible policy framework with you a couple meetings ago. And we want to continue to do that. We're refining and streamlining some of that. I think you'll see some of that tonight. We also want to bring in some additional perspective for you. In doing some of that follow-up, we've had some conversations with some professionals in the public finance area that have worked extensively in Texas, and I think it'd be really important for us to hear from them. They have worked from the city side, okay, both on the public finance and underwriting standpoint. We have Tripp Davenport with us. Tripp is a 25-year professional in public finance. His colleague Robert Rivera is with us as well, also extensive public finance background, including public service himself, 12 years on the Arlington, Texas City Council. So we have people that have sat in your seats and sat on the city side and working through these types of deals in Texas, have helped Texas sort of shape some of their structure as well. And so we found it really instructive as a staff and some discussions, and wanted to give that context with you. So our goal tonight is to hear that perspective. We think it helps speak into some of the elements we had from our previous discussion. You've obviously heard things from the development community. You've heard some research from staff, but now you'll hear some other experiences from the city side of it. We also have Betsy Knotts with us from Bassberry, who's worked closely with us on sort of the legal framework and some of the implementation components there. Our goal would be to get enough feedback from you and sort of talk a little bit about some of the key areas that might be in a policy, that we could draft a policy for you here in short order and bring that back to you at a future meeting. But this is an important additional dialogue and an additional resource we thought would be really helpful. I think Christine has a little more to put it in context from a public finance standpoint. So take it away, Christine.
Thank you, Eric. Eric did a really good introduction for this evening's discussion, and I just want to give a little background. Certainly, public finance, government issued debt. We here at the City of Franklin, and you're extremely familiar with, we issue and administer general obligation debt, water and sewer revenue debt, and that's something that we are very familiar with, and we do not on an annual basis, but on a frequent basis. And when we look at special assessment debt, we really wanted to bring in folks who live and operate in this sphere. And we are very, very thankful to have Tripp and Robert from FMS Bonds. They are the leading underwriter for special assessment bonds in the state of Texas. They do significant work in Florida and some other states. That this is the sphere that they serve as underwriters, and they work in this day in, day out. So this gives an opportunity to look at truly how this type of debt operates. Certainly, we've talked a little bit about that as staff, but we really wanted to bring to you folks who live and work in this area. And then once Robert and Tripp have finished their piece, we do have a little bit of information that Betsy Knotts from Bass, Berry & Sims is going to share regarding potential for a conduit issuer for a special assessment debt and what that would look like in Tennessee. So we'll start with, I believe Robert's going to start with us.
Good evening, Mayor and Board. Thank you for the opportunity and responsibility to be here with y'all for just a little bit. As was mentioned, we are the top special district PID bond underwriters in the state of Texas. We have literally over 95% market share. And the reason for that is that we are very attuned to the needs of the communities across Texas that are growing and dynamic, much like your own. And our perspective is that the projects that we focus on are of the absolute best. And we understand that your community is that level of threshold, and deservedly so, of the projects that y'all are considering. And although we do have the market share that we do, we are here specifically to be a resource and a reference for y'all. And if there are projects that y'all want to move forward on, we would be delighted to help participate with y'all on that. But although we do have that market share that we do, by no means do we feel that we know what's best for the city of Franklin or your community, as y'all are on the front line and have the full understanding of what's happening here and your vision. And all we want to do is be supportive of your direction. So with that, I'll hand it over to Tripp Davenport.
Good evening, Mayor, Board. Tripp Davenport with FMS Bonds. We are not muni advisors, so we don't act as a fiduciary to the city. We're not licensed to do that. From a regulatory standpoint, we do have to be engaged by the city, but we are a municipal bond underwriter. We do not FA or do any of that kind of work. So I just wanted to make that crystal clear, and everything here is for informational purposes, to share with you all some of the experiences that we've been involved with. I helped underwrite the very first special assessment bond in Texas in 2007. From that experience, we went back to the legislature and modified the statute. In Texas, it's called a PID, and made it easier. And then the Great Recession hit, and things kind of cooled off for a while. And then to Robert's comment earlier, we now have, since 2015, 95% market share. And so to date, none of the transactions we've ever worked on have gone in default. In fact, Texas has never had a default on a special assessment bond. And a lot of that can be attributed to the way that they're structured on the front end, dotting your I's, crossing your T's, doing the due diligence that's necessary to vet these projects. At the end of the day, these are extremely different from general obligation bonds. It's basically a tax-exempt real estate, land-secured financing. Every project is different, and I know that you're endeavoring to come up with a PID policy. And while that is very advisable, it also can have unintended consequences. And so flexibility is key as you consider these policies. But at the same time, they're going to be needed because you'll have lots of folks that show up that maybe want to take advantage of the IDD, but not necessarily have the wherewithal to do it appropriately. So kudos to you all and staff for taking the time and working through some of these issues. I'm going to go through my slides relatively quickly because if y'all have any questions while I'm on a slide, please ask, or at the end, we're going to field questions as well. You all know what a IDD is and how it's created and the eligible costs. You're effectively paying the developer back for putting infrastructure into the ground, and you pay them back through the use of bonds, and the residents within that community are ultimately paying for the assessments that go to repay the bondholders. So one of the reasons Texas has been so successful is, again, the due diligence and the safeguards that are put in place on these transactions. The value to lien in Texas started off at 3-to-1. The legislature has restricted the ability of cities and counties and school districts to raise taxes. In fact, tax rates are collapsing. And because of that, it's increased more capacity for assessments. So while many PID policies might say 3-to-1, the reality is today it's closer to 2-to-1 in Texas. So if I have a $200,000 lot, they can levy up to $100,000 in assessment. That's unusual. Most of these in Texas are for smaller lots, 40s, 50s, 60s, and the values are much lower than that. But nevertheless, the 2-to-1 is probably in Texas the benchmark. In Florida, where we have 80% market share, they're closer to a 3-to-1. So it just is kind of a case-by-case basis. The tax rate equivalent, so what we do is we take the assessment and we convert it to what looks like a tax. But at the end of the day, it's a special assessment, and the homeowner will pay a fixed assessment over the life of the project. So if it starts off at $1,000 a year, as values go up, that TRE, that tax rate equivalent, goes down over time, because as values go up, that assessment goes down. But you all are going to have a unique situation with your low tax rate and the high values on where does that assessment fall in place? Where does the TRE become affordable for the homeowner and the builders to pass on to the homeowners? Before we ever go to market, all of the public approvals are put in place. Our investors want to know that there's water going to the project, that they don't have any city council risk or board risk on approvals, that all their financing's been put in place, and that there's no items out there that could prevent that developer from building that project. So all of that has to be put in place before we go actually access the market. We also want to make sure that the developer has fully committed his private resources of funding. So in addition to criminal background checks, we do litigation searches and we review all of the financing documents that they have on the private side, so we know if there's any pitfalls there, and that those sources of funds have to be fully committed. Again, clean environmental, everything they have to do their phase one and make sure that the property is ready to be developed. We get an engineer's report as well. We want to know, our investors want to know what's going to be funded. We get maps, where is it going to be, and those types of things. So all of that takes place before you ever go into the market. We also usually get builder contracts. That's the gold standard in our business. If I know that there's a third party, and I'll use D.R. Horton, for example. If I know D.R. Horton has earnest money in this project, and that they're committed to this project, that's kind of a gold standard for our investors, that you have a publicly traded company that's willing to put their money where the mouth is. We also have this bond prospectus, and I'll send one to staff. It's about 900 pages long, but it's the offering document that we go into the market with, and the investors have dedicated analysts that review this. Then they'll call me with questions while we're in the market, and so they can fully understand the story that we're telling in that prospectus. The bond proceeds are held by a third-party trustee, and the developer doesn't get their hands on it until that segment of road or that segment of water sewer line are put into the ground, and a third-party engineer has come in, inspected it, and said it meets the city's specifications. So this trustee holds onto the money. That road is built. The engineer comes in, reviews, inspects the road. It can be a city engineer. And then the engineer will reach out to the city and say it's built right, and then the trustee sends the money to the developer. We also have a debt service reserve fund. So on some of your revenue debt, you may have a reserve fund. On your water, okay. Y'all are unique. But it's a revenue deal, and so we put in 1 year's debt service, basically, or max annual debt service, into a fund held by the trustee. So if the project slows down or payments are not being made, the investors have enough money to get them through that year's payment, and then they can start the foreclosure process. We also will build in capitalized interest, and this gets the developer to the point where they're selling the lots to the builders or homeowners are moving in, and the investors really don't want the developer to be stressed and make those payments. So we take the 2 or 3 years cap-I out of the bond proceeds. Yes, ma'am. So we have what's called a capitalized interest fund, and that will pay the investors for the first couple of years until that land starts transferring out of the developer's hand into a builder's hand or into a homeowner's hand. And again, the idea of that is the investors want the liquidity to make those payments, and they don't want to rely on the developer to do that. So it reduces the developer's net proceeds. So y'all aren't paying it. The developer's effectively paying it out of the bond proceeds. The assessments are levied against each individual lot or parcel. So if you've got 100 homeowners and 10 go into bankruptcy, the other 90 do not see an increase in their annual payment. That's a bondholder risk. My investors take that risk, and that's why the interest rate on these bonds are higher than your GO debt, because in GO world, if your homeowner doesn't pay, everybody else has to make up for it. And then the assessments are paid annually like ad valorem taxes, and the homeowner is responsible for that assessment payment. Go to the next one. This is just kind of a process that it's generally how it's done. You have your financial advisor, your bond counsel, your city staff. I hire a underwriter's counsel, and we are responsible for all the due diligence. If you go into the market on your GO debt, you're relying on your bond counsel, your financial advisor, and staff. Here, we're taking that risk, and we're doing all the due diligence, telling the story, coming up with the 900 pages, and conducting the due diligence on the developer and scrutinizing that developer and going into the market. And then the developer will have his consultants and attorneys. This is real quick. My bond investors give us money. We give it to the trustee. The trustee fills up all of these accounts in the trust indenture, and then whatever net proceeds are left over goes to the developer for the project. And this is how the tax collection in theory works. Go to the next one. And again, just another graph kind of visually showing you how the process works. So you're going to hear that these are riskless transactions, and that's not true. It just isn't. There's risk involved in everything. One of the things, obviously, is development risk, and what happens if things slow down or the development's not taking place. We have safeguards, whether it's staff, the engineer, the legal documents, hold the developer's feet to the fire at the end of the day, and they have to perform before they get access to those proceeds. If they don't perform, my investors are calling me up. We're making sure the city's still going to covenant and foreclose on the property. We're looking for a second developer. And oh, by the way, we have a big pot of money here to go complete this project. Suitability of bond investors. We intentionally do $100,000 denominations, so the wrong person does not end up with these bonds. You've got to be a qualified institutional buyer or an accredited investor, which is Jerry Jones, Mark Cuban. I'm from Texas. Those are the first two that come to mind. But also the typical buyer of these, it's going to be Nuveen Asset Management, Goldman Sachs, and their dedicated analysts will literally fly here. I'll take them on site visits, may introduce them to city staff, but that's only for Chamber of Commerce type discussion. They do not view this as your credit. They will tell you that, and that's one reason I kind of like to bring them in to meet with staff, because they will tell them, we do not look to you to do anything but foreclose on the property if there's non-payment of the assessments. Administrative and continuing disclosure risks. This is one of probably the biggest ones, and we've talked to staff multiple times. One of the key third-party consultants that you'll end up engaging is going to be a PID administrator. And the PID administrator basically tracks the assessments, tracks what's being built, communicates with the engineer. They're kind of the front line of defense with the residents that may move in. They will contact your PID administrator first. There's really never been an instance where someone's rating's taken a hit, except for if they don't administer these type of districts correctly. And that's why it's important to get a reputable third-party administrator to manage all of these things. And it's going to take a tremendous amount of time off of your staff's hands. There's also continuing disclosure. So on a quarterly basis, we review the developer's disclosure. They're required to post that to Emma, which is for securities, and that allows investors to know that this is a successful project or how the project's going. I monitor it because I get calls from the investors all the time. Why is this slowing down? Is there weather delays? Those types of things. And then typically the issuer will have to do an annual filing, which you already do. If you use a conduit, they'll have to file it. But at the end of the day, the administration of these things are really what you need to nail down and be comfortable with. Declining home value and default of homeowner, that kind of speaks for itself. If we have a slowdown, when we have a slowdown, it's a matter of time. There are probably going to be non-payment of some of the assessments by homeowners. Again, we have reserve funds and things of that nature to protect from that, and get you through the difficult period. But at the end of the day, that's just an inevitable part of the process. The other thing is determining underlying value. We get a third-party appraisal, again, a list of local appraisers that know what they're talking about, that will assign a value to that, what that lot is, multiply that times the number of lots. That gives you your value. We do a discounted cash flow analysis, so they don't give you the retail value. They give you, they haircut it, if you will, off of what the retail value would be. That is an extra layer of protection that kind of helps everyone. The other thing that you all, and I identified this earlier, you're going to have to get used to is that TRE, or that assessment load, because you have such low taxes. There's so much capacity for assessments. And we've already started talking to some of the national builders just to get a flavor for what they think a appropriate assessment load is. And y'all may get sick to your stomach when I tell you this, but in Texas, it's $3.10. City tax, county tax, school district tax, plus assessment, it's about a $3.10. That is decreasing because our taxes are going down. But at the end of the day, that is going to be one of the challenges in Tennessee in general. The next one. Ma'am?
Do you want to reiterate that just a little bit? Why you think that's such a struggle for us then?
Well, it's just...
We'll not have the financial ability to do that.
So your taxes are super low.
Right, it just based on the tax rate.
Right, and so because of that, there's going to be a desire by some developers to take up that assessment and make it as high as possible. At the end of the day, they want to transfer those lots over to builders. So in Texas, and I suspect this is going to happen here, the builders will put in caps in their contracts. So the market in Texas has become very efficient. The even though the developer wants a $3.10, which is in most people's PID policies, they may want that. The builders are saying, $2.80. You know, so they with taxes going down, the builders are. Yes, ma'am, they do negotiate that. But at the end of the day, again, I don't want to pick on D.R. Horton, but if D.R. Horton says I can pass this on to my end user, I know y'all are going to have to deal with that issue here, but if D.R. Horton can pass it on to the end user, and I'm going to put $3 million of earnest money into this project, I'm comfortable that even if they overshot at the 280, you can buy down the assessment. And the D.R. Horton, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, you can pay it off at any time.
Okay.
No penalty.
Thank you.
So that's another good thing about an assessment. Unlike a tax, you can wipe it out if you want to. And in fact, I've got 2 or 3 projects in Texas where LGI and another builder has lowered the assessment, prepaid the assessment because they wanted to be more marketable or competitive with another project. Yes, ma'am. Perfect.
And actually, we have a little bit of experience on that with the sewer assessments. When we did some of those several years ago, I think within 7-8 years, the vast majority of those were paid off. Even though they had windows for a 20-year repayment, all those kind of things, people will often opt for that. And we saw that in our experience with the sewer assessments. A little different animal, but in the same line.
No, it's a perfect example. So there are a lot of homeowners that got mortgages, their PID assessments were 6%. Because these are non-rated, et cetera, but they were able to get mortgages at 4%. So what they did is they wiped out their assessment and rolled it into their mortgage and reduced tremendously the amount of assessment they had to pay. Yeah, and your statute is very similar to ours. It's almost identical to the Texas statute. Florida, they have their own political subdivisions and they levy assessments, and the developers control the districts. Whereas in Texas, you have to go through a city or a county. And so the statute that you all have implemented is almost identical to the Texas statute. Another thing that these are used for quite a bit are redevelopment projects. This case study is in Plano, Texas, and they do not have to do assessments for pure resi. So what they do is when the developer knocks on the door, says, I want a tax increment reinvestment zone, or here it's TIF. Instead of doing that, the city of Plano said, we'll give you a little bit of TIF, but why don't you use special assessments? So we went in and redeveloped a mall using these PID assessments. And it was an old mall from the 80s in Collin County, Texas, or the Collin County, and redeveloped it. And it's still being developed, but just a tremendous increase to the tax base for the city. And they are very selective on their use of PIDs, and redevelopment is one that they're open for business on those. Go to the next one. This one is Mid-City. I had an opportunity to work on that in Alabama. This, again, is a mixed-use project. I don't know if any of y'all had a chance to go down there, but it's just amazing. That whole area is just booming, but it's a gorgeous, gorgeous project, and tremendously successful to date. Yeah. And then this is kind of the run-of-the-mill, it's large, but what we call a PID in Texas, that the developer was able to negotiate with the city of Salina and issued over $100 million of assessment bonds to do the major infrastructure, which is your common to all infrastructure, so water treatment plant, water lines, common to all, the thoroughfare that you see there. And then also we did internal assessments, and that's going to be the water sewer streets within a defined area of the project. And so, again, it was going to be over 7,000 single family, 4,100 multifamily, and the developer's also doing a golf course with it. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions or get into
Alderman Brown, and I'll get the Vice Mayor.
First of all, thank you. Fantastic. Thanks for also hitting declining values and caps. Those are 2 things I definitely was curious about. 2 questions I want to add, scenario questions. We talk about this stuff a lot relative to residential. Our policy, where our state law includes commercial. Are there different watch outs? Are there different things to consider relative to commercial as opposed to residential, just in the scenarios we've been talking about. And my second question is just, what about post-approval? Like, if a project has already been approved and through us, they want to go back and look at doing this now that we have a state law and a policy in place. Have you seen that scenario? What does that look like if we're going retroactively?
Sure.
On a plan?
Both great questions. On the commercial part of it, the commercial mixed-use developments are going to be more sensitive to the level of assessment than residential. You'll find that basically two ways of doing it. The developer either self-funds the assessments because it's still cheaper cost of capital than if he went out and got equity to go do this type of infrastructure. And then the other is they usually just roll it in triple net lease and the end user's ultimately paying for it. But typically the assessment load on the mixed use is going to be a lower TRE, if you will, than what you would do with a residential. Just because you can go across the street if you're commercial without the assessment and it's cheaper, so the math works. Yeah. It's also tough to get some of the big boxes to do it. So what a lot of developers will do is in an assessment district, they'll pay off the Costco or whoever it is, pay off their assessment, but all the residual development, they'll pass on to the end users.
Gotcha.
And then your second question?
Was around post-approval. Plans that have already been approved, development's already ready, but they want to come back now because we have this. What does that look like?
So that's very common, as you can imagine. Part of the issue there is this public benefit. If this was already good to go without this, why is it good to go now? A lot of cities initially are anti-assessment districts. And in Texas, we have other tools that developers can use, and cities will get run over by these other tools if they don't acquiesce to an assessment district. So once the word gets out that, hey, they're pro-assessment district now, you'll see a lot of folks come back, and it's just a negotiation at that point. At the end of the day, they're building the public infrastructure, and so some cities will say, okay, instead of an 8-inch line, why don't you do a 10-inch line? Or instead of a 2-lane road, why don't you do a 4-lane road? So they reopen the development agreement, and that horse trading starts taking place.
Can I ask one? For me, the goal of these has always been to not be an accelerator, but to be a differentiator. This in Tennessee is our opportunity to push for some things that we've not been able to push for because of state law requirements and all that. So clearly I can see where this could be a huge accelerator growth. What mechanisms have you seen in Texas to really get what you want out of a district, meaning whether it's workforce housing or better design or whatever, and not let it just be a lit match on dry ground?
All the above.
Okay. All right.
It depends on what part of the state. It's very bizarre. So in the North Texas market, Dallas-Fort Worth, Metroplex, assessment districts, all those cities want high value homes. And so they will negotiate with the developer, instead of doing a bunch of 40s and 50s, why don't you do 70s and 80s? Here's a district. In Central Texas, the Austin market, they need affordable housing. So they'll tell the developer you need a certain percentage of your project to be affordable housing, or if you don't want to do that, cut us a check. And so other parts of the state are using it to build out their park system. So let's say 40s and 50s, but if you got 1,000 lots, we're going to charge you $300 per lot, whatever the number is. Some of them are much higher than that. And they put that into their park trust fund, and they're building the city parks from that.
Yeah.
So it's a blank canvas.
Okay. It's good. Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you, sir. Had a question first. I've got three.
Yes, sir.
The first is going back, you talked about the PID administrator, and you had either recommended or just stated about a third-party PID administrator rather than having a municipal or City of Franklin PID administrator.
Right.
Expand a little bit more on that, why you make that recommendation, and what do you think the benefits are?
Well, I will just say from the underwriting perspective, where you see some of the biggest problems is a city may try to take that on themselves, and if there are any mistakes along the way, it's a black mark on the city for not performing correctly. And there are administration firms that are out there that do nothing but this. The city doesn't come out of pocket to pay for these services. The actual PID or the IDD will pay for the administrator. So it's typically 30, 40,000 a year, and it's built into the administration costs of the IDD.
Okay.
So it's not out of pocket, but these nationally recognized firms or these firms with tremendous experience is a buffer between you and a mistake, if you will, because that's all they get paid, just like an auditor or anybody else. They're the ones that are doing this, and they're the ones that have their professional license out there.
And in association with that, you've seen that both in Texas as well as in Florida?
Yes, sir. Every state that has these type of financings utilize them.
Okay. On slide 14, you had made reference to, I think it was a slide just before this one, it was in Huntsville, and you made reference to this IDD here. What is the difference? You had stated that Texas and Tennessee had a very similar IDD as it was passed by the state. What are you seeing as the difference here in Alabama's and Tennessee's?
So Tennessee and Texas almost mirror each other. So they're not distinguishable. The statute in Alabama is very difficult to work with. You have the district, but then you got to go to the city for certain approvals, and the county doesn't collect the assessments, which is a huge problem for investors. They want to know that they're being collected like taxes. There's less room for error there. Those are the biggest distinguishing factors.
Okay. And then last actually surfaced when Alderman Brown was asking a question, and you had stated that there are some locations, some municipalities in Texas that had an affordable housing required percentage for attainable housing. Give us a little bit of background on that, why they put that in place, what the benefits and drawbacks of that are.
Sure. It's my experience that the developers they'd rather cut a check than to add that into their community for various reasons. And it's unclear how you define affordable housing. Travis County, which is where Austin, Texas is, they have a policy that if you want to go do a PID, do it, but you have to have X percentage of affordable housing or you cut us a big check. And there is a huge desire, huge need in that market to get lower income housing and so forth, because there's nowhere for the folks to live, and they have to go live further out and commute in, which is another issue and hassle. And so they made that part of their policy. Again, it's my experience that typically the developer waives that and just cuts a check.
And so just as a follow-up on that, when we are talking about attainable and workforce housing, you're bundling that or putting that under an umbrella?
Well, that's the problem. If you look at the definition that they're utilizing, they're talking about true affordable housing. And I can tell you assessments don't work really good with affordable housing. Okay. Workforce or attainable housing, smaller lots, those types of things, it works pretty well. But they're really trying to, they have, HUD requirements and all of these types of things, federal government type requirements, and it just makes the paperwork alone very difficult for the developers to even be able to monitor whether or not they're compliant, and it's just easier to cut a check.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Baggett.
Thank you. As I was, a couple questions. Are you aware we have impact fees here?
Yes, sir.
So how would you see the impact fees and the IDD working together, or including those in this or excluding? How would you see that impact? Because, how did you see that interface in our setup?
Sure. So in Texas, we have impact fees. You all wisely added it to your statute as a permissible public improvement. In Texas, it is not. And so the impact fees happen as they produce lots, and the city gets the money or does the impact fees and gets the money over time. With you all, you can monetize that now up front. So using it as an eligible cost, you're going to be able to accelerate those impact fees utilizing the IDD statute.
Well, we already monetize them up front. When they pull their permits, they are their impact fees.
They have to pay them at permit.
Right, but I'm talking about when you go to issue the bonds, you could utilize them that way. Now, that you got to talk to the developer about it and everything else, because if they have other eligible
So they get
costs.
front-loaded.
It's front loaded.
Yeah.
I think that's a concern I need to work through is because now you've got then projects that have impact fees that are not within a IDD. For instance, if say an insurance agency wanted to build a little small, 20,000 square foot building, and it's not eligible for an IDD or for this. But I've got to stroke. Well, this hypothetical person would have to stroke a check for the $400,000 in impact fees up front, whereas larger development would get to finance that through an IDD over 30 years and paid for by the end user. So I want to look at that. I want to understand that closer because I do think that there's, and then also that impacts the market, right? I mean, it impacts the market of cost of building, but also cost of occupancy in the commercial side. How does that sit with you?
Well, that's a public policy issue, and that's way above my pay grade. You get paid the big bucks.
I understand.
You get paid the big bucks.
But is that a reasonable? That's a reasonable thing to have to consider,
I understand the issue. Yes, sir.
The other thing is when we set out to do this, really we were looking at ways, not necessarily of different ways to finance our impact fees. At least I wasn't. It was really how can we get creative and quite frankly didn't set out to figure out how to have some affordable attainable housing incentive thing. But that's kind of what it's morphed into. What it set out to do was to find ways to get additional infrastructure included in with projects over and above what we already require. Mm-hmm. And to do so and allow the new development to pay for that additional infrastructure, therefore reducing our capital improvement plan possible, like the $40 million road to Goose Creek. Okay, and so and that's a perfect example. You got to hear about it. Instead of us tying up $40 million in capital over the next 10 years, they come in with an IDD right there by Goose Creek. And because of the community benefit, there is some additional costs. Now it has to be a negotiation. There's got to be benefit to everybody to do it, but that road wouldn't be needed. And the $40 million of taxpayer money from the west side of town wouldn't be needed if that new development wasn't coming. And so all the impact fees get us a lot of the way there. They don't get us all the way there. And so that was the original. I just want us to remember and recalibrate like why we started to do this, because it's kind of evolved into a lot more than that. Maybe that wasn't why everyone started to do it. Right. Yeah. But that was my. Do you see cities in Texas that use it in that manner?
That is how they use it. Most of the cities in Texas that are utilizing this, small population, in the path of growth, very low valued property at the time, and the city of Salina is probably our case study in Texas of how to progressively, if you want to use that word, use the PID. They negotiated developers to oversize roads, to increase the sizing of their water lines. They also use TIF, or in Texas we call it TERS, to expand their road program. And Salina was able to open up so many more tracts of land for development and did it on the backs of developers. And in consideration for that, the developers got this upfront money to do their project where they would have to go get equity at 25% money. Here they're getting non-recourse, 5% money at the time to replace that. And then at the end of the day, they weren't having to pay it back, the homeowners were. So there was clearly a financial benefit for the developer. And so the city said, we know that there was a financial benefit. Will you oversize this road? Will you oversize this line, be a partner with us and do a public-private partnership? City of Princeton, City of Kyle, who we visit with regularly, had a $40 million project, ironically. No, it was $25 million, I'm sorry. Project road that they cobbled together 4 different developments and got the developers to contribute and built that road. So now with the assessments, you can only pay the pro rata benefit that people within the district are utilizing, But that doesn't stop them from using, in Texas, TERS money and then also developers' private resources to fund the other things. And so with the concept all money is fungible, that's what they did.
I'm interested in that. More of that. Thank you.
Can I follow up on that a little bit? One of the things we've struggled with or thought hard about is that idea of nexus and these larger project components. And the one analogy or piece that we've pointed to is, hey, you can't necessarily use it for the wastewater treatment plant, but you might be able to use it for the transmission lines that connect to that. Is that accurate in your experience in Texas, and especially in terms of these larger scale infrastructure projects that might be on a community-wide CIP like we talked about earlier today?
Sure.
But also, you said a pro rata share, but also the types of it, something that might be a broader system improvement versus something that is more targeted towards direct service to that area of our community.
Yes, sir. So, City of Manor, Texas, the developer was a large public builder, and the city needed a $10 million water treatment plant. And they said, look, we'll give you a PID in Texas and fund all of your internals, all of your common to all infrastructure, if you'll go build that water treatment plant. And so the developer came out of zero, out of pocket, for all the internal and infrastructure that they built within the district. And it was going to cost them about $10 million, ironically. And so they used that $10 million and built a water treatment plant. So
Our water treatments are much more.
well,
Yeah.
this section of town is,
Yeah. So,
But anyhow,
so is it more targeted to service to that area? I mean, that.
no, it opened up for other parts of the city. And again, from the developer's perspective, it was a wash. It was a wash.
They weren't using special assessments for it.
No, they were
Go ahead.
using private capital.
Yeah, they used private capital.
Okay. So that's a little different animal.
Well,
there. Okay.
But they got, with the PID, they were able to fund everything that they were going to spend $10 million on. And instead, they took their own private dollars, built the treatment plant, and used the PID dollars to do the infrastructure.
Where was that?
Manor, Texas.
Yeah, last follow-up with.
Yeah, it's
Alderman
related to
Gray, and
this.
I'll go to
I think that's
Alderman
interesting
Caesar.
because what's happening is just the shifting of capital. They were going to spend the money on the internals anyway,
Right.
and then they took their capital to do the thing that the city really wanted, which was something else. I think that
Yeah.
definitely needs to be.
No, they did need that plant. It was being
Well,
built
sure,
in
of
phases.
course, right? It did
Yeah.
help it, but
Yeah.
but at that point, would it matter what the
No, it was a wash.
Yeah, well, because
It was a
the
mathematical
development
wash.
agreement with their private capital didn't really. It wouldn't. They could go build whatever the city wanted at that point. Because okay.
Alderman Caesar.
Thank you. Appreciate you coming in and
Yes, sir.
sharing some insight. I have an opinion on the mathematical wash because I assume in different areas, maybe risk shifts. So it's not exact, hey, I've got money in this pocket, I put it in my left pocket,
Yeah.
because I would assume your investors may feel differently about a pipe going into the ground than a road or a piece of property. But that's for a different time. You mentioned earlier, my focus is going to be a little bit on the process that you've laid out. And PIDs and IDDs are, for this discussion, the same,
Yep.
right? You talked, and I'm trying to follow the math here, value to lien 3-to-1 and sometimes 2-to-1. When we were looking at this a few weeks ago, we saw up to 5x of the assessed property
Well,
tax.
yeah,
And I'm trying to tie the dollars together there.
We've shifted gears on that, quite frankly. We talked about an overall cap that was different than the value to lien. And what was sort of said that night and some other discussion was that really happens within the project naturally. And that's what Tripp was kind of describing about how that kind of works through as home builders working in it and how far that can go. So a cap kind of naturally develops within a project and with the team that's working together to
And I
to deliver
appreciate
it. We're really looking at that value to, and where I think we're honing in from a staff recommended policy would be that value to lien component. And the state law minimum is 2-to-1. As we sit at it today, I would suggest we raise the bar on that higher than 2-to-1. And you've seen that experience other places. We may get more comfortable with something less than that over time, but I would say as a starting point, 3-to-1 makes a lot of sense from where we sit. But that's something to look at. But that's where we're honing in on that piece as opposed to a specific, broader, like global cap. That we've been kind of, as we've done more research, we've moved away from that.
Appreciate you helping me get comfortable there because, and when you say minimum, you mean the lowest value to exchange. So 3-to-1 would be higher than 2-to-1 in that
Yes,
analogy.
yes.
Got it. So that's the first question. I'm curious more about the way you talked about default. Nobody in Texas is defaulted, right? So
Correct.
hypothetically, the risk has not been realized yet.
Right.
But you did talk about foreclosures. Default and foreclosure are not the same.
No, sir. When I referenced foreclosures, that was a homeowner not being able to pay.
So the entire bond doesn't fall because one leg of
Right.
the stool falls away. And you mentioned that the city was foreclosing on those. So would the city, the way that the legislature has set this up, would the city be the one that's responsible for foreclosing on the property and then holding the property and be responsible for reselling that?
So I know that, no, not, city wouldn't necessarily be reselling it, but the issuer or whoever agrees to the lien, the assessment lien, does covenant to foreclose just like they would on taxes or anything else and start that process.
And so we've talked about that, but would that actually be city staff or the risk? Because I'm trying to de-risk the
However
city
you-
through this
sure,
process.
100%. Whoever you all use for tax collections typically is.
So it would be the county as we've discussed.
Well, if we don't know if the county
If they will.
agree to fill this role for us, we may need to have that be developed as part of this as well.
But even when we do foreclose, it's a joint effort between us and them.
Yeah.
And
yeah, we initiate it and they help carry it.
So this doesn't add an additional layer necessarily of risk beyond collecting for taxes to the city.
And every fee that you incur or staff time or anything
Goes
else
back
gets paid out of the PIT assessment.
Shauna, did you have a different opinion there?
I mean,
Perhaps
but also-
because it's more opportunities to foreclose?
And we talked earlier and we didn't really get into this detail, but a lot of times we find if people aren't paying their special assessment district or they're not, or their fee, they're probably also not paying their taxes. So it's usually
It's
all one thing. Generally, it's rare that you see someone pay part and not all.
Okay. And so you also said, and I'm not intending to kind of interrogate you, but these are the questions that are bouncing around
These
in
are
my
good
mind.
questions.
Are there any communities in Texas that don't offer a PID or don't support a PID program?
Yes, sir.
How do they-
Because generally, this is my take on it. This isn't them telling me this, but it's because they don't need to. There are a lot of the infill suburban communities outside.
Because there's not space for them to have
Well,
development?
not yet that, but also the values are such that you're going to have a tear down of a home with a new McMansion there instead of a bunch of 40s and 50s and 60s lots, right? It's a market driven.
Okay. And that answers my question, which was if there's communities broadly, but broadly it's offered throughout Texas.
Yes, sir. I mean, if you are a small city in the path of growth, I'm not aware of any that won't do it. Now, there was a huge education. I want to be crystal clear. There was a huge education process. We started this 2005. First bonds were issued in 2007 because, like you all, Texas is a very conservative state. But I will tell you, they've embraced this tool because it's the most conservative tool for development, in their opinion. You have an end game. Our other districts in Texas are ad valorem districts, and those things can be out there for 50, 70 years. And people are going to have to pay all that. With the assessments, they go away. You know when they're ending. So it's viewed, and they don't go up with values as they go up. So it's perceived and viewed as a very conservative tool, and the cities own the assets, and they don't have the money to buy the assets, right? On their own general tax base. So they own the assets, and it's just a good way for them to help build out their city without being run over by these other special districts.
And maybe just the final question, and this is a hard question to answer, but why do you think that none of these have defaulted?
In Texas, I believe because we've structured them right and we've vetted these projects right. And in Texas, much like Tennessee, it's a growing state, and we just haven't experienced the downturn. Even during the Great Recession, our rate of growth leveled off, but it didn't declined significantly like it did in other parts of the country.
And I said it was the last one, but maybe not. When you say we, do you mean the bond issuer and the bond purchaser?
Well, the PID community, the way that we've structured these and so forth, because our law is very difficult to work with, and then also, unlike Tennessee, and your current bond counsel is a former Texas Attorney General for Public Finance, so she can attest to this, but you have to send that transcript, that bond transcript, to the AG's office. And while we thought the statute was black and white in certain areas, the AG would sometimes see gray. And so there were certain restraints put on the community that isn't necessarily in the statute, and for the better.
Sure.
But nevertheless, we had that good angel sitting on our shoulder before we could close on the bonds that told us, you got to do it this way.
Thanks for coming in.
Yep.
Yep.
Anybody else? Alderman Barnhill.
You described or mentioned a small city in Texas in the way of development. Development's coming their way. You certainly wouldn't describe Franklin as being that.
No, sir. No, sir.
So if that's the case, and that's the type of city that uses this particular tool, where is the advantage to the city of Franklin then, who is not that small city, who is not necessarily having an area that needs to be redeveloped, that the city is looking to push development there? We're being pushed to push back from development. And yet we're using a tool here that supposedly frees up more money for infrastructure or development or whatever. I'm having a little difficulty understanding necessarily why this is, and it doesn't appear to be harmful to the city of Franklin or whatever city. But I'm having a little difficulty understanding why this tool is a great tool for the city of Franklin on some of the things that you've described as far as the small cities or smaller cities. Now, Austin certainly is not a small city by any stretch of the imagination, but we're not in an area where we need to necessarily promote development or whatever. We're not there. And we're not in the path. We are the path.
Yes, sir. No, great question. My answer was specific to his question to me, which was asking what cities don't do it and what cities do. And typically your atypical is going to be a smaller city of growth. The city of Plano is not a small city.
Right.
And it uses it to foster increased values on an otherwise blighted project. City of Austin has used it both for residential and also for commercial use. The city of Kyle, which is not a small city, is building out infrastructure that they don't have to subsidize by their general tax base. Okay. And so those special assessments, the only ones paying it are the folks that agree to pay that assessment that live in that district. So the general tax base is not subsidizing this development. It's coming on the backs of the residents that live there. So it does free up capital, and it builds quality assets for the city that they would otherwise have to do if the developer wanted to build and use the general funds of the city to.
And again, I think that pretty much answers the question that I just asked.
Yes, sir.
And I appreciate that answer.
Yes, sir.
Alderman Blanton.
Thank you guys for coming. I think for me, when we start looking at this, the biggest thing that makes me happy is the opportunity to provide some affordable, attainable workforce housing.
Yes, sir.
Because for us, that's our issue, is that we have people commuting into our town to work jobs that can't live here.
Yep.
So for me, when you say in your situations, it's kind of been a difficult hurdle, to me, that's the biggest hurdle I want to be able to cross, because our legislator took inclusionary zoning now. Actually, it was one of our legislators in the legislature. And I'll be quiet there. But that really hurt us because it was a way that we could kind of like piecemeal some things together.
Yes, sir.
So that's, for me personally, that's the biggest decider for me to support this, if it can really move the needle on that. As Clyde says, we don't have a problem alluring development. We have a problem keeping our community can't even think of the appropriate word because I tend to say things
No, I know
wrong.
I know what you're saying exactly.
We want it to be a place for everyone,
Yes, ma'am.
not just people who can afford it.
Yes, ma'am. 100%.
Tear down that little house and build that big house.
No, 100%. And I want to just clarify because I think we engaged in that discussion.
No, and I'm not accusing you. I'm saying I want you to help us figure out how to get that part of the equation.
These types of districts are perfect if you want to do 40s and 50s, the homes at a
Can you say 40s or 50s?
foot lots. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I was like,
I'm sorry.
40s or 50s. He thought you meant the price of the lot. So now we both know. Thank you.
No, but it's perfect for a house that a teacher or a policeman or a fireman would move into. And that's what a lot of these smaller communities that I discussed earlier are utilizing it for because they need a place for those folks to live. So that is the most
For our
common-
children.
Exactly. What I was saying earlier is that this one issuer had a policy of doing true affordable housing, which is basically subsidized housing and things
We
of that
already have
nature.
that. Mhm.
And that's where it becomes really difficult.
Understood.
But to facilitate for the common guy to find and lady to find a place to live, this tool is perfect for that.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Alderman Berger.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Does the city have to be, or are they required to be, or can they choose to be or not choose to be the one that finds the lender, and then the developer has to use that entity? Or can the developer find the lender themselves?
So when you say lender, do you mean the purchaser of the bonds?
Yeah, the bonds. Mhm.
I'm just
How does
trying to
that
think.
usually work?
So
Is it-
how it works is you all have a project and you're ready to go. We come in and we send out these due diligence questionnaires and we collect a mountain of information. We put all this information and summarize it in what's called a prospectus. And that will include a summary of the bond indenture. You'll have what's called a service and assessment plan or whatever vernacular ends up coming out, but it's the item that tracks all the assessments. And then all of the due diligence we did will summarize for the investors. And it's a 900-page commercial. We have a summary page because we know that not everyone's going to read 900 pages. And then we send that into the marketplace and we get very large firms to compete for those bonds.
Okay.
And that hopefully brings the yield down. And then we're able to fund the project fund with that. When you if you had a developer that wanted to effectively place it, it's going to be tough for them to do that. And there are also tax law issues that come into
Yeah.
play. There's a lot of,
So all those lenders, they come back in and then you take the best one
Yes,
you've
ma'am.
got.
Yes, ma'am.
It's
Yes.
not like we're out there picking and choosing
No, ma'am.
somebody that we want. It's just you put that out to the market.
to qualified
Yeah.
folks that can buy it because
To
these are highly
Right.
risky
High-end,
bonds. Yes,
high-end,
ma'am.
yeah.
So we will limit it
Got it.
to large institutions that you've heard of
Yeah.
that advertise on the Sunday morning shows.
Sure.
And then you'll also have the Mark Cubans of the world that will try to compete
Yeah,
for
so
it.
they're all going to compete.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, and I got one more question for you, but Christine, you wanted to say something?
Mr. Mayor would allow, I wanted to just give a comment about Alderman Berger. I believe your question was also about how underwriters would be selected. And certainly, here at the City of Franklin, we have very high, what we do with our public securities are very highly rated. So we do competitive sales. And so you'll hear staff give a report. We'll go out to market, take bids from underwriters. And we can get 10 to 12 bids from underwriters by doing a competitive sale for AAA or AA rated bonds. This is a very different selection process when the securities are not going to be rated or they're barely rated investment. If you're like a triple B or a low A rated, you do a process those are called negotiated bond deals. So rather than a competitive process where you just tell the underwriting community, we're selling AAA bonds on Tuesday morning at 10 a.m.
Yeah, and then they bid on them.
These are story bonds. That was the term that TRIP uses, a story. And when you have a story to tell on your credit, you need to actually select an underwriter who is experienced and has access to those investors in that storyline. And so if it's an airport credit, airport revenue, special assessments, the issuer actually does a request for proposal for for underwriters, and there is a selection of an underwriter of who is strong in that segment. And so then that underwriter that is selected to join the financing team is actually part of putting documents together, doing negotiations, because they're having to go out and sell that story and sell that credit.
Right, I get it.
So that's the difference, is that I believe that you were getting at, this would be a negotiated sale, and an underwriter is selected based on their qualifications in that segment and their ability to identify those investors, as well as help the financing team to develop a project and a financing that is acceptable to these investors.
Yeah, good explanation. Very good.
Thank you. I'm sorry to jump in there on that.
And does anybody ever do, when they're trying to get on board with this program, did they ever do a test case? Like, we've got a couple developments ready to go, and I think they're interested in the IDD, but, whether they, I don't want to do this in a vacuum, we're sort of trying to figure out how to do this. So where they could actually, we could do, something like, hey, plug your numbers in and let's look at this and test the ideas of park, workforce housing, fire station, schools, or something like that. And just give us an idea how that looks. Do you ever do any communities ever try to look at that? I mean, before they commit?
Yes, ma'am. I mean, there's always a negotiation that takes place, but absolutely cities will take a test case, and learn from that, because there's going to be bumps in the road.
That's what I want.
And you're going to learn from that. And so it's really a good idea to take one or two marquee projects, work on them, and then learn what you didn't know, because you don't know what you don't know, right? And from that, either beef up a policy or tweak a policy, or then come up with a policy altogether. And maybe y'all think this is great. And so then you open it up to other types of projects.
Or you can tweak it.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Good information. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
Vice Mayor and then Alderman Brown.
Thank you. So I had a follow-up question as Alderman Berger was asking, but earlier today, tonight, Alderman Blanton and Alderman Barnhill was talking about size of cities. I kind of want to redirect that. You had mentioned Salinas, Princeton, Kyle, Manard, maybe a couple of others as well, but those are the ones that I wrote down. Have you worked with any cities that are AAA bond rated?
Yes, sir. So City of Fort Worth has issued several PID bonds. We're working on a massive project with them right now. AAA, Plano's AAA, Austin's AAA, Kyle AA plus. They're going to get mad at me if they're AAA, but I think they're AA plus. So yes, sir, absolutely.
So the reason I asked that is, if you dated back, I think you said to 2007. Started 2005, stated 2007 moving forward. So on those AAA bonded rated cities that you just named, what's been the long-term outcome? What's been the implication if they've used these PIDs there in Texas?
So,
and this is in regards to their AAA rating.
Right. There's almost zero discussion, if any at all, by the rating agencies. And again, I'm not a financial advisor, but I do communicate with the financial advisors. And with some of the smaller communities that have used it a lot, there's more discussion about it. Why are you using them? How are you using them? But with the big AAAs, really, it's a special revenue of the city, and they're not looking to this, when they're giving that rating on the GO, they're not really, it's a footnote in the audit sometimes, but they really aren't bringing it up, because from a material standpoint, the amount that they've issued compared to their GO debt, it's not even close. And so it's, from my understanding, not a big topic of discussion. But with the smaller cities, whenever you're 1,200 or starting off 1,200 residents, and now you've got 6 PIDs and you've got, a future 5,000 residents, it becomes a bigger topic. Not as it relates to their GO, but it's about the growth and the commercial activity that comes after all of that growth.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Alderman Brown.
Last question. In your experience, have you ever seen a municipality designate an area that they say, this is an area we would love to see redeveloped, draw their own sort of border of a potential IDD, and then invite the people that are within that, the commercial entities and so forth, to participate in that? Have you ever seen it go, not from the developer to the city, but to the city to say, hey, we'd like to see this area be an IDD?
I've seen several attempts.
Okay.
Most
Well
of them not successful.
Okay.
Part of it is just asking, because you're ultimately going to be talking about multiple developers probably. Now, you might advertise, if you do this kind of development, we'll consider giving you an IDD, but drawing a line on the map, it becomes such a difficult, because the timing more than anything. The developer may love it, but I'm not ready to develop this yet, whereas two others may. So you got to levy those assessments.
Yeah.
Right? And so it just becomes kind of a timing mathematical issue.
Okay. Thank you, by the way. Great.
I think we wanted to have Betsy touch on a topic and Vernon a couple things. Go for it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Alderman Caesar, as Betsy comes
And I
in.
think this may be a Christine question as well. You talked about the story bond, and I'm curious if the city is telling the story on behalf of the development entity, or who's the one that initiates and introduces the story. If the developer is actually going to be owning the risk associated with it, it would make logical sense to me that the developer is the one that is responsible for telling that story, either through the underwriter or through the underwriter to the potential investors. But help me understand who builds the story, who tells the story. I don't want I guess in short, I don't want the city telling a story for a developer that may not be aligned, or the city owning the responsibility for telling a story for a developer that may not align with what the developer's goal or objectives are. And that, to me, if I'm a developer, I don't want someone else telling my story, especially when the rate of my money is going to be dependent on who crafts that story.
I'll give you my answer from my experience, and then but I would like Tripp to, from special assessments, when in a prior life, when I worked on bonds that were story bonds, especially I'll give an airport example, and you have publicly owned airport, but you've got privately owned airlines and privately owned rental car companies who provide revenue. The development of that story that the financing team is putting together, it does have to involve those private entities, because the health of that airline, those rental car companies, their revenues are paying back that debt. So you do have that financing team that was shown on one of their slides, where you have all these different professionals involved. It's on story bonds, that team is much larger, and you're negotiating, and whoever is helping to repay is at the table, because you do have underwriters saying, perhaps, this is not going to work for our investors. And the private entities have to hear that, as well as the issuer. So the story, this takes time. It can take a good period of time to develop all of this, because it is not simply a tax levy that you see in a general obligation or a water and sewer bond. The story, it takes time, and then you have to have agreements to those. There's lots of documents, as they were talking about, 900 pages of documents. You'll have lots of documents that are going to monument these agreements that are going on between all the different parties through these negotiations. And so the feedback from the underwriters, the feedback from the private entities that are benefiting, as well as with the issuer, the attorneys that are representing everyone, all of that has to work together to come up to what that story is finally memorialized in a transaction. So that's my experience from serving in different roles within those teams. But let Tripp talk specifically about special assessments.
So you, as the issuer, will have the decision who the underwriter is. The underwriter tells the story. We send out a document to your city staff and bond counsel and financial advisor requesting Chamber of Commerce type stuff, population, rate of growth, that type of stuff. And that's pretty much all that's in there in the offering document related to the city. We also send one to the developer, and we do criminal background checks, we do litigation searches, we go above and beyond what's in that list. They send us their corporate formation papers, their property transaction papers. We want to know how much they pay for the land. Was it a handshake deal, or was it I can't talk.
Memorialized.
Memorialized, thank you, good Lord. Memorialized. We also ask them to tell us the story about their project, and that includes who the builders are going to be, who the folks that are going to do commercial are going to be, and that type of thing, give us the vision. Then me and my attorney put together a summary of all of those documents, the documents we get from the city and the documents that we get from you all, from the developer. And I can send a copy to staff of an offering document just to give you a flavor for it. Importantly, I take the risk that if there's material misstatement of facts or untruths that are not put in there, I'm wearing an orange jumpsuit, and there's not one deal worth wearing an orange jumpsuit. So we take this very seriously, and this is all we do, by the way. If I was to get a call from staff saying we have some GEO bonds coming, that's just not what we do. We could do it, but that's just not what we do. 100% do nothing but this. And so from that, we've learned lessons over decades of where the poison pills are and when something doesn't smell right. And we're as proud of the deals we didn't do as the deals that we have done. So we, again, take this very seriously.
Let me follow up on what you just said. Talk about how you differentiate the deals that this is a fit for and the ones that just aren't. Because my fear is that everyone's going to ask for them. And how do we differentiate the good projects from the ones that aren't as good a fit? And this should not be an entitlement. This should be something that we're really enhancing development in our community or achieving really important policy goals of the community.
Yes, sir.
So talk about how you weed out the fit with the ones that don't fit.
Sure. So when we send out this due diligence questionnaire, it's very, very detailed. In fact, most developers do not like me after this process. When they get the money, then they're happy. But during that process, it's not fun for them. And very quickly, we engage specific attorneys that they know how I think, what I'm looking for. They can weed stuff out that doesn't look right legally. We look at the financials early on when you're doing the development agreement. We'll do a debt capacity and compare that to what the developer thinks they're going to get and scrutinize it. Again, most of the time this is a very collaborative process, but sometimes it's not because there are some people out there that aren't good people and they just are trying to get free money. And there was a project in Central Texas, and it was clear to us that the developer is not providing us with good and accurate information. And we finally, on a conference call with everybody on, told the city, look, we could get this deal done, but we're not going to do it. I'll give you a list of my competitors. You can call them up, and I'm sure they'll go do the deal. And to the city's credit, they said, well, what would make this deal underwritable? And so we said X, Y, and Z. And the city said, well, if FMS is not going to underwrite it, you've got to do X, Y, or Z, or we're not doing the deal at all. So 9 months later, they did X, Y, and Z, went to market, and had a successful project. So there's just, it's connect the dots. You get all the underlying legal documentation, the financial information, you get the builder contracts, and through all that process, you're going to find out whether or not this thing makes sense or not. I can't always tell you if it makes sense up front.
Yeah.
But I can tell you midway through the process, or once we have a chance to do the initial due diligence. We had another one, City Central Texas as well, and I get a call from the city, we're ready to go, we're so excited about this project, and I simply Googled the developer's name, and page after page after page of FBI investigations and development fraud, just a simple Google. We still do criminal background checks, but just doing that, and I sent the link to the city, his assistant city manager, he's now city manager, and he just was like, because my council loves this project. It's like, I'm
We'll
sorry.
just let Betsy
Thank you.
go ahead and
Thank you.
make her comments. Yeah. Get the shepherd's cook and pull him off
Well,
just a second.
I just want to put on the record that he referred to me as the angel on his shoulder. So in a prior life, I did work at the Texas Attorney General's office in the Public Finance Division, and we reviewed every security that was issued in the state, and we were angels. So I appreciate that. So I just wanted to add some color. We were talking about the issuer, doing the negotiated sale and choosing the underwriter. So we've recommended to the city that the issuer be either the Industrial Development Board here in Franklin or a public building authority. because that is a conduit issuer. And so the credit risk is even further away from you when you use them instead of you as a city. And so the Industrial Development Board or the Public Building Authority would be the ones choosing the underwriter and doing what he just described. And I wanted to share that I'm working with a West Tennessee County mayor. We are going to create a public building authority that specializes in special assessment financings, because as we all know, West Tennessee is growing like crazy and in need of workforce housing. And so they're going to need to do kind of pooled loans for smaller issuers, because these developments aren't going to be high dollar, but they still need to be able to access the market. And so they will be hiring a third-party administrator as a part of that program. And so that is an option that is on the table, because that public building authority can issue statewide. So they could partner with Franklin and help. And so I just wanted to share that that's in the works. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It'll be probably 6 months before it's up and running, but we're working on it.
That could help significantly with the administrative burden. That has been a concern for us, quite frankly, so appreciate that. I know we're running short of time, but wanted to close out kind of where we are with some next steps and some components there. Let Vernon touch on that.
Thank you, Eric, and good evening, everybody. I want to say thank you to Tripp and Robert. We met with some group of us earlier this afternoon, very informative. And this whole process has been incredibly informative, and hopefully it reflects that we're doing due diligence and to get this set up and get it right. And that includes Rick and Rachel and others that have been coming along and helping us in this process. What Eric and us, we put together here are some of the things we talked about, so we can leave here maybe today to bring back in a bit some semblance of a policy. And we talked about the value to lien at 3-to-1, maybe it's a little more, a little less. We had previously talked about market studies, and what we've learned is that a company like FMS will make sure they have appraisals to understand the value of the property, because that's really what's securing those bonds and that financing. Betsy just talked about the conduit and that could be inclusive of a third-party administrator that will help us avoid some more bureaucracy in every IDD that y'all consider approving. The community benefits, we had a great discussion the last time. I heard loud and clear that we don't want to check the box, that we want some discretion. And it wasn't about the community benefits that were listed, but we've retailored that, rethought it to make it a weighted scorecard. So we leave the discretion initially to the developer to come in to what are those community benefits that are outside of the district's funding that they're going to provide, and what are their values. And the scorecard that I put in the packet tonight is an illustration of what some of those community public benefits are and what could be the values. We talked about that an application needs to include 100 points to be considered. And again, that's an illustration. I also want to just address one point quickly, because this is incredibly insightful, as I mentioned, that our impact fees, there's a nexus to those to add additional capacity to what the impact of a development will be. And those can be, through the legislation, included in the IDD. When we're talking about community benefits, we're talking about the private funds that a developer will contribute, because conventional financing bumps up against 20% for a developer to have funds to develop property. Establishing the district provides those funds somewhere is probably, who knows, 6-7%. What we're trying to do as the community is capture that 13 or 14%, some of it, for community benefits to increase some infrastructure, okay? That's outside of the district. Tripp had mentioned, and we've talked about, even Rick had mentioned, that some communities or some developers don't want to provide community benefits. They'd rather provide a lot fee, as they did in outside Austin, or perhaps 10-15% of the principal amount of the bonds would come to the city that the city would put in towards housing, towards parks, towards roads, for whatever that decision is made. So we've included that in that policy if you've looked at the somewhat updated version. Also in the policy that we draft, and there wasn't much discussion and there was a lot of agreement too, and everybody agrees on it, the transparency and disclosure is important. It really validates why we're doing what we're doing, not only initially for those initial property owners that are going to buy into that district, but in the future when people transition, that it shows why it was created. So with that, if you're all in agreement, we'll work on drafting a policy. It'll include the mechanics of how an application's made, how we bring it to you as an approval process, and then of course the execution or administration of it.
Alderman Brown.
I think we're very close. And by the way, thank you. That was invaluable. I feel even better about this whole thing than I did walking in, and I'm probably its greatest champion. So thank you for all that. Here's the one piece I'm still really stuck on, and it's this scorecard. And I'll just say, I scored Armistead along with Craig. Armistead checked off 8 of the 14 boxes, so more than 50%, and only scored an 85. Armistead, I would argue, if there was any development to happen in this city in the next 10 years, I would probably want it to be Armistead. And they need the tool. And so it concerns me that something like that wouldn't cross the threshold of where we are. And I know you said it was kind of a conceptual and hypothetical, but to me, and the other thing I'll say is that I think every development's gonna be different. What we might want from Armistead is gonna be very different than we might want from an REM, not to say that Ovation or REM is going to go for it, but just what we might want in those areas based on the geography, based on the development that it is. I just think it's going to be totally different. I like the idea of us having a scorecard, maybe so that we can sort of get our thoughts together as we're evaluating. What I don't want this to turn into is, well, you didn't make the points, and so sorry, no such luck. I don't want that in the policy. I don't want the scorecard in the policy, I guess is my.
Let me, if I may, and what you heard tonight and what you've been hearing all along, this is a negotiation because every development is different. What I would say, when you applied it to Armistead, we want Armistead to apply it when they submit their application to show the community benefits that they're going to include up and above what our standards require. And then we as staff can react to it, provide a recommendation, and ultimately you're going to interject on what those values are. That sheet that we've been working on are examples. They're not intended to be checking the box. At all.
I would urge you to not take it too literally. The idea is to help you differentiate and also help make the case for what is the benefit to do this.
Sure.
And that's a little bit what I was getting at with my last question is, how do we help you differentiate the ones that are really going to achieve what you want to achieve and have the impact versus something that just doesn't make the cut, and give you some tool to help compare. So that's the intent. It may not be this exact tool, but that's where I think we want to try to help with. So there may be some other ways to get there. We'll keep working on that, but that's the piece we're trying to provide you, is to differentiate that overall reason why you do it.
Let me leave you with this last one. This afternoon, or this morning, somebody called, a national builder, set up an appointment to come in and talk to me about IDDs tomorrow. And the point being is I think Alderman Berger said, that taking some of the developments we have here and talking about what it might look like, we want to make sure that when an application comes forth, because the legislation requires acting on it in 45 days, that there's boundaries here that,
Sure.
so when we get a lot of them, they're similar in what they're gonna provide as a benefit to our
Yeah.
really cool community. Sound good?
All right, I've got Alderman Baggett, then Alderman Berger, and then the vice mayor, and we're over time, so make it short.
So,
Like that.
we
Go
good?
ahead.
Oh, well, just
Alderman Baggett, you're on.
waiting for the chatter to end. So I would tell you that to Matt's point, the rubric is also, there are some concerns in it. And I think we can massage that. I would, when you brought up the Armistead, if they came in and they were under the old conservation subdivision in Envision Franklin, they didn't have the village, it was not the Village Green, it was conservation subdivision. So if they'd have chosen the item that was 20% additional open space over and above what was required in Envision Franklin, honestly, that might have been enough for, in that rural character, for me to consider doing that, because, and that might have made a difference and so I think I agree. I think we have to be flexible in that. I don't want this to be used for as a tool to speed up growth. It has already, we've already slowed growth, as this board has. We're going to continue to do that to some degree, more than we've done. We have to have tools, though, to get additional. When we slow growth, guess what actually happens? Revenue from impact fees goes down, which is why we raised them, one of the reasons why we've raised them. So we've got to look at ways. The Goose Creek is another great example. I want to hear some like actual case studies of areas where I would be willing to do this if it is tied to a specific road project or some sort of benefit. I feel like I need to know, like Alderman Barnhill said, like, why do we need to do this? And there was the third point that he said, which was some cities use this so that to pay for infrastructure related costs so that the broader tax base doesn't have to pay for it. So that that's what I want to hone in on. That's what's motivating to me. That's what I think is going to be motivating to the citizens. And there are some additional benefits that might be nice to have. But critically, if it's not going to be used to spur growth like in these other parts of Texas, which is not what we were using this for, I want to see really how these things align, these public benefits align with what we're hearing from the community, which is roads, open space, and rural character. And so that would be what I want to look at. Like public art and all the rest of things, that's great, but like, you know, no. I mean, I like public art, but like, you're not going to get a shot at this because, you know.
All right, Alderman Berger.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm very interested in the public benefit as well, but I agree with these gentlemen over here. We don't want that score sheet to be limiting. And also, I don't want to hold anybody hostage because of that, but I certainly do want to get the public benefit. And there are things that we need and they need to provide and we need to work together. But I don't want to make it like a hostage situation and say, well, you've got to do this and you have to get 100 points or you're gone. So the only other thing I would say that I would like staff to consult with the developers or with a developer as they look at a project, whether it be Armistead, Ovation, whoever wants to jump in on this, but to look at a project. I want staff to do that, look at a project as we draft this policy. I think that's a must. I think we have to do that because that'll help us with our test case.
Vice Mayor, you're the last word.
Thank you, sir. And my peers have stated a couple of my points here. I do want to go back to what Alderman Blanton said. I definitely do want to see attainable and workforce housing. I think this is an option for a growth as we continue to expand southeast and going directly east. What was said in Tripp and Robert's presentation is structured on the front end, and I feel like that's where we're going. That's how we're developing. But as we're doing that, the key that was said was flexibility, because of without flexibility, there could be unintended consequences. And I see the head nods back there. And I think that what we'll do is over time, we're going to continuously improve our IDD process. And there's enough passion, enough focus right here that I think we'll be in a good position.
15 minutes. No, 10 minutes.
10.
10 minutes.
Yeah, we don't got to move any chairs.
10 minutes.